Guys, I won't lie to you. I might not look great today. In fact, I probably don't sound great today because I've been sick all of this week. And so I haven't made any videos. And for that, I truly apologize. But today, we're going to be making a new video for you guys to enjoy. And it is going to be a mammoth. Today, we are going to be ranking every single unique weapon in the entirety of Borderlands 2. Now, I have here my tier list. I have S all the way down to F tier. And we are going to be ranking all of these lovely Borderlands 2 weapons below. Now, if any of you paused the screen and thought, let me count and see how many weapons there are. Yes, there are 139 weapons in my tier list. And Loot Lemon dictates that there are 141. However, 2 of these weapons are actually unobtainable in the game. One is here, the error message. You cannot obtain this within the game. This is a data mined weapon. And the other one here is the fire drill, which is another data mined weapon. So we are not going to be counting those 2 since you cannot acquire them normally in the base game. However, we are going to be counting every single other weapon in Borderlands 2. So, without further ado, let's get into it. First things first. Now, this is going to be a true test because I can't see the names, so I'm just going to have to... Hopefully, I'll be able to recognize all of these. I should be able to recognize all of these. The thousands of hours I have in Borderlands 2 dictates that I should recognize all of these. First up, the Shirome. This is a sniper rifle. I'm pretty sure it's the reward for completing the Hyperion Slaughter. And it is kind of average. It does allow you to heal, so there is like that little niche use. It's a Moxie weapon, so it can heal you. But this weapon is not great. I'll probably put it in B tier just for its kind of bit of utility, allowing you to heal. Next, the Actualizer. This is a Seraph weapon, and this weapon just kind of sucks. It's kind of like the Bitch, but I would just say a worse version of the Bitch. So I'm going to go ahead and stick Hyperion. Hyperion SMGs themselves are decent, but this one is not very special. Put it in D tier. The Ahab. This by itself is not a very good launcher, but because of the amount of glitches you can perform, like Pimper-habbing with Salvador, or just like swap weapon shotting, like if you shoot the Flakka and then swap to an Ahab, this gun has the most base damage in the entire game, and so for those unlisted kind of glitchy things that you can use, it is very useful. So for that reason alone, I'm going to put it up in, I'll say A tier, because by itself the weapon is not good at all. The Amigo Sincero. This is another one that is basically identical to another weapon we have later on in this list, but this weapon allows you to bypass enemy shields, and that is an incredibly useful effect to have. It's acquired in the new Fight for Sanctuary DLC, and yeah, what a fantastic use and a good gun overall. I'm going to stick this one again up in A tier, the Badaboom. The Badaboom is definitely a fan favourite, acquired from King Mong in the Iridium Blight. This is a great launcher on its own. Bandit launcher, it's a legendary bandit. It's incredible on its own. However, allowing you to be able to rocket jump, so it's got utility and it's got good damage, and it can come in all the elements. This gun is just an overall smash hit, and for that, it is going to be our first S tier weapon. Next up, we have the Bane. The Bane, actually, in itself, is not a bad SMG. The damage on it's pretty good. It can put out some very decent DPS, but man, the Bane is the most horrendous weapon you could ever use in Borderlands 2. So for that reason, I'm going to stick it down in E tier. I don't think it's utterly useless, but I know some mad people, I'm looking at you, Lil Gas Mask, have done entire playthroughs with the Bane, but this weapon sucks, guys. Do not get this. Onto a weapon that doesn't suck, the Blockhead. This weapon, found in the Caustic Caverns in a Minecraft DLC, is a really good TDO shotgun. There aren't that many good TDO shotguns in the game, to be honest with you, but one of the real standouts is this blue unique TDO, the Blockhead. Only ever comes in fire element, so that's a little bit of a downside, but I'd say this weapon is a solid B tier weapon for sure. A really solid TDO shotgun. You can't go wrong with this one. Next up, we have the Bone Shredder. Yeah, this is the Bone Shredder. It looks very similar to the Tattler and does a very similar thing. But this gun is pretty good. It's certainly no slouch. It comes in every element as well. But compared to its Tattler counterpart, the Tattler is just a better weapon. I'd put this solidly middle of the pack, C tier. Next up, we've got the 12-pounder. This is definitely an awesome launcher for sure. Crazy high base damage. You get it in the Pirates Booty DLC. And just a really fun weapon to use. Really fast cannonballs fire out of this rocket launcher, which is great, fun weapon to use. And good base damage. I'll put this up in B tier. Next up, the Baby Maker. This weapon is a staple in some of the best TDO reload builds in the game, specifically on like Axton with his explosive builds. The Baby Maker really is a one-of-a-kind TDO weapon, and so for that reason, I think I'm going to stick it up in the A tier with some of the greats. Bearcat. This is the pearlescent assault rifle. This weapon is honestly one of the worst guns in the game. Definitely one of the worst pearlescents in the game. It costs so much ammo. It doesn't deal enough damage. I don't want to go sticking it below the Bane, but ooh, it's really bad, guys. The Bearcat sucks. Maybe in normal mode you can make it work, but anything other than that, this gun is horrible. And you can't really get pearls to drop in normal mode anyway, unless you're getting them out of a vending machine. So, not a vending machine, a slot machine. So, Bearcat, I'll put it E. I'll put it E. The weapon sucks. It really is not good. The Bitch, like I say, the Bitch is basically a better actualizer. The Bitch is a really good weapon. If you find it on your playthrough when killing Bunker, if you get it to drop there and then in normal mode, this gun can carry you for a good few levels. I'll put this gun solidly, I'll put it in C tier, probably just in front of the Bone Shredder. Yeah, I think the Bitch is a pretty good weapon. Next, we have the Avenger. Very much like the Baby Maker, this gun is great for your TDO reload builds. However, it's much more situational than the Baby Maker. This gun is incredibly hard to use the TDO reload, unless you're setting up something like a Hyperius insta-kill or something like that with Axton. It's not a bad gun by itself. You do get that armor regeneration and stuff like that, but it's not great. I'll probably put it middle of the pack on B tier, I think. For a pearlescent, it really needs to be better. Speaking of a better pearlescent, this is the Becker. This is probably the best Jacobs assault rifle in the entire game, maybe bar one. We'll talk about that weapon later, but this gun is fantastic. It's a pearl and it fires its initial projectile and then gets unlisted projectiles as well, so it works really well with things like the B. I'll put this one solidly up in A tier. Fantastic weapon. Next is Moxxi's Bad Touch. This is a pretty good corrosive Maliwan SMG that you can get pretty early on in the game. Just tip Moxxi a few £100 and she should drop this weapon for you. A really solid weapon. Unfortunately, you can only obtain this once per playthrough unless you perform a little glitch where you get the weapon, then you fast travel away and come back, and then it'll just be sitting on the counter and you can pick it up, and then next time you tip her, you're going to get another one. But if you do it normally and you tip her next time, you'll be getting the good touch. So it's only a single time acquire. But for a single time acquire, this is a very solid weapon. I'm going to put it in C tier. Next up, the Boom Puppy. The Boom Puppy is... It really suffers. A lot of these Torg assault rifles really aren't very good. The only way the Torg assault rifle is any good is if it's a Torg barrel on a different type of weapon. Like a Torg barrel on a Vladov weapon or a Torg barrel on a Jacobs assault rifle, then it can be quite good. The Torg barrels on the Torg weapons, they're really not very good at all. I'll put the Boom Puppy right down near the Bearcat in E tier. Next up, the Buffalo Gun. This gun's very much a gimmick, and unfortunately it just doesn't have high enough base damage for what you're sacrificing in the rate of fire and the lack of Hammer Scope. It can be a fun gun to use for a little bit, but I do not personally recommend this one. I'll put it in D tier. The Bunny, this launcher is very much a gimmick. You TDR throw, reload it, and it bounces around the map crazy, doesn't deal an awful lot of damage. Comes in quite a few elements though, and can be fun on a Javelin Krieg build just to mess around with. But again, I wouldn't recommend this. I'll put it down in E tier. The Butcher. This is another great pearlescent weapon, however it has been overshadowed by the recent Fight for Sanctuary DLC weapon, the Overcompensator, which does everything the Butcher does except is much easier to acquire. The Butcher being a pearl is very rare, however it still is a very good performer on characters like Maya and that sort of thing. I'll probably put the Butcher up. I don't think it's as strong as the Becker. I'd probably put it at the top of B tier. It's a really solid weapon. Next up, the Tulane. This is a very strange weapon. You get it from the Clan Wars the Clan Wars side quest, and it's not great. The gimmick with the weapon is it fires shock and slag projectiles, which is pretty good in itself, but this weapon has a chance to slag the user, which really just isn't very good at all. Especially going into normal, into TVHM and UVHM, when slag is allowing enemies to deal triple damage against you and stuff like that. This weapon really struggles. Then I'll probably put this down in D tier. By itself, it's not bad, but I wouldn't really pick this weapon up, guys. Next up, the Cobra. This is probably one of the most disappointing weapons in the entire game. It is a Tiny Tina's weapon, you can see by the skin, and it is a sniper that fires explosive projectiles, which is incredibly interesting. However, this is possibly the rarest gun on this entire list, having to only be able to obtain it from the burner enemies as a random drop. This gun is ridiculous to try and get, and really, once you get it, it's not great at all, guys. I'll probably stick this down in D tier. In fact, I might put it in E tier just out of how hard it is to get and how not useful the weapon is when you do get it. The Carnage, this is another pearlescent weapon. The Carnage can be very good, however it is mandatory that you do get this vertical grip to grant you extra projectiles. It can be quite good on an explosives build, but it's certainly not our best pearlescent in the game. I'm going to put this in C tier. This is the Commerce. This drops very early on in the game from the Assassinate the Assassins mission. However, although having one of the coolest skins in the entire game, the Commerce really isn't very good. It only comes at lightning damage, and what damage it does is very little. I will stick this down the bottom of E tier. To use this in normal mode is not a terrible idea, but anything further than that, it is really terrible. Conference Call. This is a staple, probably one of the most famous weapons in all of Borderlands. This, paired with a B-Shield back in the day, used to destroy everything and anything, and even nowadays, paired with the B-Shield, it still does an immense amount of damage. The Conference Call truly is one of the best weapons in Borderlands 2, and that is why it's going straight into S tier. The Creamer, this is another one of the Moxie weapons allowing us to heal, and this is very useful being a rocket launcher with high base damage that allows us to heal as well, because the large base damage is going to directly translate to the healing we get. So although it provides us only with a small amount of healing, I think it's about 5%, that 5% on a lot of base damage goes a long way. So for that reason, I'm going to stick the Creamer up in A tier. This is a really solid rocket launcher, guys. Next up, we have Miss Moxie's Crit. This is another Moxie weapon, but if this weapon isn't the most frustrating weapon to use in the entire game, I don't know what is. This weapon has a random chance to drop out of your hands while using it, acquired from the Tiny Tina's DLC, and that in itself makes it frustrating to use, and with nothing else really being special about the weapon, I'll probably sit this down with a Tulane in just frustrating weapons to use. Next up is the Cowboy. This is one of the Hammerlock weapons amongst a series of different Hammerlock weapons, and spoiler alert, all of these Hammerlock weapons suck. They are all capped out on fire rate by supposedly having much more base damage, but the damage really doesn't translate very well, and so Hammerlock's Hunt DLC is not much fun to begin with, so if you're going with a primary intention of getting some of these weapons, I would turn somewhere else, guys. This Cowboy is going straight into E tier. Next up, the Dominator. A very weird weapon. It's such a strange unique to have on this list. Some of you may not have ever even seen this. It's acquired down at the Corset Caverns for completing a side quest. But not a weapon you'd ever really want to use. Spiker pistols in general are not good at all, and the Dominator is certainly no exception. I will stick this in E tier as well. Deliverance. Now, there was a new glitch found relatively recently with the Deliverance, which makes this gun actually quite good. There's a Joltstude video where he goes through the glitch, which is really interesting to watch. I would highly recommend watching it. But the Deliverance is a very interesting TDR shotgun. When you reload it, it throws the gun, and the gun then flies around and shoots the enemies before hitting them. Now, these shots can gain bonus damages and amp damage from the B-Shield and stuff like that, and that's partly where the glitch comes into play. But for a TDR shotgun, which there aren't many in the game, this is another really solid one. I'm going to put it up in B tier with the Blockhead. Next up, the Devastator. A Seraph. Hand cannon by itself, this gun is not terrible, but certainly not great. However, there is a much easier Torgue hand cannon to acquire, and also the other Torgue hand cannon can be acquired very early on in the game. Excluding that, this gun is not terrible. It fires 2 Torgue projectiles, kind of in like a upwards pattern, but it's quite difficult to control the recoil on. You have to spend a lot of Seraph Crystals to get this. I wouldn't particularly recommend it. I'll put it down with the Actualizer in D tier. Now, apologies if it seems like I'm racing through this tier list guide. Guys, I have got 139 weapons to get through, so I'm trying to get through them as quick as I can with giving you as much useful information as I can. Just a quick reminder, please be sure to like and subscribe. We're really trying to reach 1k subs, and I'd appreciate if you'd help me out with that. That would be great. And if you want me to go in depth with any more of these weapons, just let me know down in the comments below, and I can go through these weapons in more detail in their own concise tier lists. The dog. This is another weapon, a blue unique weapon that is acquired from the Assassinate the Assassins mission very early on in the game. However, unlike the Commerce, this is a much better version. Bandit shotguns themselves can be very strong, and this one is definitely no slouch. Doesn't really have any unique abilities other than a very cool skin, but this certainly is not a weapon to scoff at, especially in the early game. I'll put it up in C tier. Evil Smasher. Now, the Evil Smasher used to be one of the most broken weapons in the game due to a damage glitch that was performed every time you reload this gun. That has since been patched over the years, and in 2024, this weapon is truly terrible and is a shell of its former self. I will stick the Evil Smasher. Might be our first F tier weapon. This gun is totally useless nowadays. The Emperor. This is a Dahl SMG that drops from one of the assassins like these Commerce and 3-Dog. However, instead of being a 1 in 3 like these weapons, this weapon is a 1 in 20 and certainly does not deserve to be. The Emperor is not a good weapon by any stretch of the imagination and is a pain to farm as well. I will put the Emperor down in D tier. It's just a very uneventful Dahl SMG, and Dahl SMGs themselves, bar some, are usually not very good. Next up, the Fibber. Now, the Fibber can be one of the best weapons in the entire game if you get the right variant. You need to be looking, there are 3 different types of Fibbers that can roll, and you need to be looking for the one that has the highest damage. This is a Ricochet Fibber. Now, what happens here is you shoot the ground and the projectile splits into, I think it's about 9 different projectiles, and each of these projectiles can gain bonus amp damage. So for a character like Gage, where you're relying on ricochets, you can put on a B shield, and this gun can truly put out some of the most damage in the entire game and is a staple on many characters in UVHM. For that reason, I'm going to be sticking it up in A tier. The Elephant Gun, much like the Buffalo Gun, this has no sights and a slightly higher base damage, but that does not make up for the fact that this gun is not good at all. The iron sights on the Elephant Gun are significantly worse than the Buffalo Gun. From Hammerlock's Hunt, I will stick this down in the Cowboy where it belongs, down in E tier. In fact, putting that in E tier, wow. Do you know what? This is going in F tier. This gun truly is horrible. It's just a worse version of the Buffalo Gun with a much slower fire rate. I cannot see a single reason why I would ever use this weapon. Next up, the Flacker. The Flacker by itself is a very good gun. However, you can pair it with some glitches like swap Flacker in or swapping away to another weapon and then back to the Flacker to reset your fire rate, so you can fire the Flacker very quickly. For that reason, the Flacker can become a really potent shredding machine in the later Borderlands levels. And also in early game, this weapon really is a performer. I'm going to stick it up in A tier. Next up, we have the Godfinger. This is not the best pearlescent, but not the worst. It's very situational. The Godfinger gains increased damage the further away you are from the enemy. The way it works is the further you are, you have higher chance to spawn additional projectiles, up to 13 at a max distance. Now, this is good, and if you get that max distance with all these projectiles, this gun can deal a lot of damage. But Borderlands is not really a long-range game. Most of your fighting ends up happening at close range, so the Godfinger really struggles to shine. I'd probably put the Godfinger down in D tier. not the best per lesson and very hard to acquire. Next up, the Florentine. This is another slag and shock weapon, however with none of the downsides of the Tulane. The Florentine really is a fantastic weapon acquired from the Tiny Tina's DLC from the vendor there, and this is a fantastic gun to get your hands on at any level you can. I'm going to put this near the top of B tier. Next, we have the Greed. This is from the Pirates Booty DLC, a fire Jacobs weapon, one of the very few elemental Jacobs weapons in the game, and the Greed is certainly no slouch. This is a very fun weapon to use. It's quite an interesting niche having your Jacobs weapon deal fire damage, and the gun is very good. It's basically just a standard Jacobs weapon. It's basically just a standard Jacobs weapon. Jesus, what is happening to my tongue? It is basically just a standard Jacobs weapon. That's a lot of S's. Except with a fire element slapped on top. This gun's pretty great. I'm sticking it in B tier. Next up, we've got Moxie's Good Touch. Very much like the Bad Touch, this is just a very solid Maliwan SMG, but only rolls in the fire element. I'm going to stick it directly next to its corrosive counterpart, the Bad Touch. Next, the Grog Nozzle. Now, if you've ever seen any Borderlands playthrough in Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, you will have seen the Grog Nozzle. This is acquired from one of these side quests. It is a mission weapon from one of the side quests in Tiny Tina's DLC, and this is probably the only weapon that makes UVHM mode actually possible for the Vault Hunters, giving you a whopping 65% healing damage compared to the normal Moxie weapons, which are giving you anywhere between 2% and about 5%. This weapon truly allows you to heal out the enemy damage, and because Borderlands scaling is so broken, every single bit of damage you take in UVHM is going to health gate you, and the next bit of damage is going to kill you. So unless you're healing to full health between each shot, you are not going to be able to survive, and that is where the Grog Nozzle comes in, along with the fact that this weapon is slag, allowing you to deal 3 times the damage to every enemy in UVHM. The Grog Nozzle really is a fantastic weapon. Next on the list is Hector's Paradise. This is a Hornet clone, but in the shock variant. The Hornet itself is a very good weapon, and so Hector's Paradise is again a good weapon. It's nothing extraordinary, but it's just a very decent weapon. I will stick it up in C tier. The Hellfire is basically exactly the same as the Good Touch, but slightly harder to acquire due to it being a legendary drop from the enemy Scorch. But this is a very good weapon. I would put it slightly higher than the Bad Touch due to it having higher base damage and also a higher fire damage, but only marginally. It is overall a good weapon. The Hornet, like I say, this is a very solid dial pistol, but in the corrosive variant. In fact, I might change my mind on Hector's Paradise. No, I'm not going to. But I am going to put the Hornet slightly higher in the bottom of B tier, and I'll tell you why. Is because corrosive damage is very useful later on in the game against specifically the peak and also a lot of loader enemies and stuff. There aren't that many unique corrosive weapons in the game, and I find that the scaling in UVHM, the shields don't tend to matter that much. The shields do not scale that high in UVHM, whereas the health does, meaning our shock damage is much less valuable than corrosive damage for certain enemies. So I'll stick the Hornet slightly higher, but both are very good weapons. Next up, the Interfacer. This gun is absolutely fantastic. The only problem with it is it is incredibly difficult to get, having to kill Voracidus in Ultimate Vault Hunter mode to obtain this weapon. However, you can obtain it in True Vault Hunter mode by buying it from the Seraph vendor, and that's where a lot of the use of this weapon comes out, is in True Vault Hunter mode. It is by far the best weapon you can acquire very early on in the game, providing you have the Seraph crystals to do so. The Interfacer truly is an absolutely fantastic weapon, along with its unique ability, which allows you to aim down sights and not lose any movement speed. Pair this with Axton's Expertise perk, and this can allow you to travel very fast in a very fun, unique way. The Interfacer really is probably one of the best weapons in the entire game, but it is difficult to acquire. I'm going to put it right at the top of A tier. Next up, the Invader. This weapon, I don't know who thought it was a good idea to put burst fire on a sniper rifle. it's never really worked very well, and the Invader is no exception. This gun is going straight into the bottom of D tier. Next up, we have the Jolly Roger. I'm going to put this gun right next to its brother in the base game, the Dog. A very solid bandit shotgun with its unique ability firing in a skull and crossbones pattern. It's acquired from the Scarlet DLC, but just a solid bandit shotgun. Bandit shotguns are no slouch in this game, so I'm going to stick it in C tier. Next, the Hive. This is a drop from Saturn and can be one of the best weapons in the entire game. The Hive can put out some absolutely immense damage, especially on characters like Gage, where all of the negative accuracy from Anarchy does not matter to the Hive when you're firing balls that shoot out projectiles that home onto enemies. This weapon is really a monster when you can get it going with some stackable damage. For that reason, I'm going to put it up in A tier. Next, we have the Judge. This is another one of our Assassinate the Assassins side mission drops. Just a standard Jacobs pistol with a TDO barrel. Looks kind of weird. Doesn't do anything special. It's going to go right down in D tier. Next, we have the Landscaper, a Torgue shotgun. Now, this weapon, funnily enough, was made more famous in Borderlands, the pre-sequel, due to your ability to be able to jump in space with I think it's called the Moonscaper in the pre-sequel. Allows you to jump really far throughout space in the pre-sequel, but in Borderlands 2, this gun really doesn't see any use. So for that reason, I'm going to put it down in D tier. Just a standard Jacobs barrel Torgue shotgun. Next, the Lasco. If you've seen any of my videos, you will know that I absolutely love this weapon. It is one of the easiest weapons to acquire in the game, being found very early on in Frostburnt Canyon. Just as a drop on the floor, you can get multiple of them at a time, and this weapon has perfect hipfire accuracy. All in all, a very solid, fantastic weapon. I'm going to put it right at the top of B tier. Next, we have the Law. This is acquired from a side mission in Sanctuary, and if you pair this weapon with a shield called Order, allows you to heal. However, by the time you get into UBHM, this healing is not enough, and so the Law just becomes a standard Jacobs pistol with a melee attachment on. It's not bad, but it's certainly not great. I'm going to stick it. It's definitely better than the Judge. I'll probably put it in C tier, just for some niche uses. Next up, the Leadstorm. This is by far one of the best pearlescent weapons in the entire game. And I don't know why I said pearlescent, because it's a Seraph weapon. This is by far one of the best Seraph weapons in the game, as it allows you to pair it with the B-Shield and get an absolutely immense amount of projectiles from this weapon, all receiving the amp damage. This weapon can truly shred some of the hardest bosses at the end of the game, and for that reason I'm going to stick it right at the top of A tier. Next, the Maggie. Definitely one of the better Jacobs pistols in the game, and with Jacobs pistols already being very strong, the Maggie is certainly no exception. You get this from Clan Wars, and it's a fantastic weapon to use, going straight into A tier. The Madhouse. Wow, the Madhouse. You would truly have to be mad to use this weapon. Honestly, I could not say a single good thing about this weapon. It fires projectiles that seem to bend around your enemies, and doesn't deal any damage when it hits in the first place. The gimmick of this weapon as well is if you shoot the floor, it splits into 2 more projectiles, but you can't even aim those projectiles. The Madhouse really just is a terrible weapon, and I'm going to stick it right at the bottom of E tier. As in normal mode, I suppose you can make it work. Next up, the Gwen's Head, found in a random box throughout the dust. This weapon is a pretty solid dial pistol, can roll in any of the elements, and can be pretty useful really. It's certainly not a bad weapon, and for that reason I'm going to put it in C tier. Next up, the Hail. The Hail is a Moxie weapon, allowing us to heal ourselves, and although it has quite a tricky projectile pattern to get used to, once you do get used to it, the Hail can really be one of the strongest weapons in the game, as its projectiles benefit off splash damage as well as regular damage. and that combos into a lot of different perks later on in the game. But if you've picked up this weapon and found it annoying to use on Xbox, once you're on PC and you can slide your FOV to have a bigger FOV to be able to see the enemies while you're kind of looking down to aim the weapon, this gun really is truly one of the best guns in the game. I'm going to stick it right up in A tier. Next we have the Gob, the infamous Gob. This gun just doesn't do anything right and it doesn't do anything wrong. It's just a bandit corrosive pistol. Nothing special about it. I'm going to put it in D tier. There's just nothing special about this weapon. No real reason to use it over any other bandit pistol you could get. Now, a weapon that is worth using is the Heartbreaker. This is a fire-only Hyperion shotgun. However, like we can see, it has the Moxie skin, allowing us to heal. And this weapon certainly is no slouch at all, putting out some really high damage, especially against flesh enemies. This gun is going straight to the top of B tier. Or I'm going to put it at the bottom of A tier, actually. The Heartbreaker really is a fantastic weapon. Next up, we have Fremington's Edge. The gimmick of this weapon is it has a really high zoom value. Yeah, I don't know why you'd want a high zoom in Borderlands 2. This is not a zoomy sniper game. There's really no reason to use this weapon. As well as it being a Hyperion sniper rifle, so it only gets accurate after you fire like the first 3 shots. God knows why you'd want it. The Fremington Edge sucks. I'm putting it in E tier. Next up we have the Infection. This is a Seraph pistol acquired from one of the Seraph vendors, and it's a really interesting weapon because it doesn't deal any good damage at all. Its base damage sucks, and the only real damage it does is its dot damage. But as we know in Borderlands 2, dot damage is not very good in the game. However, this can be used to stack up some certain characters' abilities very quickly. I'm looking at Krieg and his Bloodlust stacks. This can be used to stack up his Bloodlust stacks, some of the quickest in the entire game. So for that reason alone, it's definitely got some value. I'm going to put it in C tier, just for a occasional niche use. Next we have the Kablaster. Unfortunately, this weapon has been severely overshadowed by its big brother released in the Fight for Sanctuary DLC. However, the Kablaster certainly isn't a bad weapon. The worst thing about it is its terrible fire rate. So anywhere out of normal mode, I'm not recommending this gun, but it's certainly not awful. I'm going to put it in D tier. Next, the Kitten. Very much like the Hail, this is a Moxie assault rifle that can roll in any different element and has a unique firing pattern. The Hail fires in an arc, whereas this gun fires in a smiley face pattern, so it's a bit difficult to hit the enemies unless you're right up close, but this weapon certainly does good up close, allowing you to heal as well due to its Moxie skin. This weapon's really solid. I think the Hail is better due to its crit hit modifier, and once you get used to it, but the Kitten's no slouch. I'm going to put it in the top of B tier. Next up, we got the Little Eevee. This is from the Pirates DLC, and this weapon is unique effect, allows you to get increased cooldown rate on your super activation. Now, where this becomes very good is you can stack this effect massively to get instant cooldowns on all of your super activations, which is fantastic and has very good uses throughout the game. It is a little bit annoying to stack, as you will lose it if you die or if you save quit. However, this gun definitely is a fun one to use and mess around with. I'm going to put it in B tier. The Longbow. This is another one of our sniper rifles that do not have a scope. However, unlike the Elephant gun and the Buffalo gun, the Longbow is actually a fantastic weapon. It shoots Minecraft arrows, which in itself are quite cool and have an interesting gun pattern to them. However, this gun does a hell of a lot of damage, and realistically, you're never aiming down sights with this weapon anyway, you're just hip firing it, and this gun really puts out some crazy damage. I'm going to put it solidly with its brother in B tier next to the Blockhead. Both of them are Minecraft Easter egg weapons, and both of them are really great. Next, we have the Lyuda. This is definitely one of the best snipers in the entire game, with a crazy fast fire rate, an insanely high magazine, can come in every different element, and the bullet splits into 4 different projectiles as you fire it. The Lyuda really is great, and for that reason it is going straight into A tier. Next, we have the Hammerbuster, and the Hammerbuster by itself is not a terrible assault rifle. However, with the release of the Fight for Sanctuary DLC, we got the Thompson, which is an exactly identical looking skin. However, the Thompson is just the Hammerbuster on steroids. If I was to put the Hammerbuster in D tier, being a very average Jacobs assault rifle, the Thompson is going straight into A tier as one of the best Jacobs assault rifles in the entire game. Next, we have the Hydra. This weapon has the most projectiles on a shotgun in the entire game, and for that reason alone, you can get some absolutely insane damage with this weapon. This, offhanded in Salvador, truly makes some bosses in this game an absolute joke, and for that reason, it is going straight into A tier. The reason it's not S tier is because this weapon is quite difficult to use, and unless you are directly in front of the enemy, right up close, you're going to miss a lot of those projectiles and lose out on a lot of damage. Now, the Infinity Pistol is, in my opinion, quite a disappointment. Borderlands 3, it is terrible. In Borderlands 2, it is not that bad, but just not that great. If it didn't allow you to pull off a few infinite ammo glitches, I wouldn't be interested in it. But Vladov pistols in this game are pretty good, and the Infinity is no exception. I think I'm going to put this in C tier. The Logan's Gun, by itself, the Logan's Gun definitely isn't a great weapon. A fire-only Hyperion pistol that fires little rocket projectiles. However, what makes this gun so useful is when paired with the Sham. If you shoot this weapon at the floor, it allows you to regenerate rocket ammo. And this, as you may expect, has no end of uses. So, for that reason alone, the Logan Gun's going to B tier. This is a staple for any of my characters. I always try and farm a Logan's Gun with a Sham to just have infinite rocket ammo. Next, we have the Hawkeye. Certainly not a bad sniper rifle. However, having to farm Veracitus the Invincible for this weapon certainly doesn't make it much fun to get. And when it's basically doing what a normal Jacob sniper does, is it really worth it? It does have a very high crit multiplier, but there are other weapons in the game that I can think of in pistol form that give you an even higher crit bonus, making this weapon sort of irrelevant. I'm going to put it in C tier. Next, the Gunnerang. You get this from the Rackman Easter egg. This weapon is a Tedial pistol. That kind of speaks for itself. Tedial pistols in this game are not great. This is definitely one of the better ones, allowing you to, when you throw it, it does a loop and sort of homes onto enemies, but I don't know. I'm really not a fan of this weapon. I'm going to stick it in D tier. Next, we have the Retcher, and the only thing this gun is good for is making you want to retch. This drops from Hyperion Invincible and only drops in Corrosive Element. I've scarcely used a worse gun in this whole game, especially from a raid boss. Yeah, this is going to F tier. Next, the Infection Cleaner. This is a copy and pasted Avenger, but only rolls in Fire Element. The Avenger's pretty good, so the Infection's pretty good. It's going right below the Avenger due to its lack of utility, only dropping in fire damage, but still not a bad SMG. Next up, we have the Ruby, or the Baby Grog Nozzle. The Ruby's healing allows 12.5%, which is nothing compared to the 65% healing on the Grog Nozzle. However, you can obtain this during the main story of the game, and it can come in any different element, and you can have this to a locked farm. Every time you respawn in with the Grog Nozzle, it changes its parts, which might not seem a big deal. However, if, for example, you're doing a melee build with Zero, you would want a Slag Ruby with a blade on it for the increased melee damage. You would have to save quit, could be 10, 20 times, 30 times to get a blade on your Grog Nozzle. But you can have a guaranteed one here on the Ruby if you just read-only farm it when you acquire it. The Ruby is a really solid pistol for its utility and allowing it to have a melee attachment. I'm going to put this up in A tier. Really just a fantastic gun. Oh my god, our tier list is getting big. Can I scroll out a bit? There you go. hopefully help us be able to see a little bit better. Next up, the Hot Mama. This is another one of our effervescent rarity weapons, released in the Fight for Sanctuary DLC. Our second Jacob's weapon to have an element, and again that element is fire. This weapon is not bad. It's got some unique shooting effects which make it quite interesting, but not great. I'd sort of put this middle of the road. There's not too much special about it, but as far as the sniper rifle, Jacob's sniper, goes in UVHM, this is probably about as good as you can get. I'll probably stick it up next to the longbow in B tier. Next up, the Greed. This is another one of our Hammerlock weapons, a Jacob's pistol. However, this Jacob's pistol caps your fire rate. The whole gimmick with Jacob's weapons is that they have high damage and they fire as fast as you can pull the trigger. That's what makes them so good. This Greed cancels your ability to fire as fast as you can, and with not much higher base damage to compensate, it's going into F tier. This gun sucks. Next up, the Sword Explosion. This is a fantastic gun acquired from the Tiny Tina DLC, and Torque shotguns in this game are great in themselves, and the Sword Explosion is no exception. One thing you do really want on this weapon is the vertical grip to give you the extra projectiles. And if you manage to get it, this gun is truly a monster. It is going straight into the top of B tier. Oh, I don't know. I'd put it on par with the Flak actually. It's going in A tier. Next up, the Toaster. This is a bandit launcher, which in itself, bandit launchers are pretty good, but this one certainly isn't special in any way, and I don't know why you'd pick this over the Bada Boom, and so it's going in D tier. Next up, the Saw Bar. Another good pearlescent weapon in this game. I know Borderlands 2 does have a few good pearlescent weapons, not many, but this is one of them. Only comes in fire element. And the thing which makes this weapon good is at a certain distance, the projectiles split into 4 different projectiles, dealing a lot of splash damage. So on a character like Axton with the B shield, this gun can really shine. Personally not a favourite of mine, but I'd put it solidly up in B tier. Next up, the Sandhawk. Guys, if you've seen any video in Borderlands 2, you would have seen the Sandhawk. This gun is absolutely incredible. Still getting the bonus from the B shield, allowing all of these 8 different bullets on a single projectile to deal amp damage, and times that by being a Dahl weapon, so firing a burst of them. There is not a single weapon in the game that can output more damage than the Sandhawk, aside from Pimper having glitch, that sort of stuff. But from the Pirates Booty DLC, this gun is a true gem and is going straight up into S tier without greats. Next up, the Rock Salt. Now, the Rock Salt is a bandit shotgun like our Dog and our Jolly Roger. However, the Rock Salt is just great. It really is great. Having the Jacob's barrel on it gives you kind of better stats in all aspects except for those additional projectiles. You don't really need it. It's really accurate. It's got a quick reload. When you get this gun from Tannis, sort of a third into the main story, it's really a great weapon to use. I'm going to put this one straight up into... I'd go for the top of C tier. You can't really bring many bandit shotguns into UVHM, so that's why I'm not going to put it any higher. But it's a great weapon. Next up, the Scorpio from our best boy Roland. May he rest in peace. Although he can rest in peace because this weapon is not very good. It's a Dahl assault rifle, which doesn't really do anything special. It's an accurate burst fire weapon, if that's of any interest to you. Dahl assault rifles aren't very good in this game in general. I'm going to put it down in D tier. Next, the Seraphim. This is... I always find it difficult with the Seraph weapons because they're just so annoying to use. They have such slow projectile velocity. So... it's only a fire assault rifle. I don't know. C tier. It's not great. It's not terrible. Next up, the Seeker. This is our Torg assault rifle. In my opinion, the only good Torg assault rifles, really, excluding a couple, are with a Vladoff barrel on them. The fire rate is just not quick enough to make it feel worthwhile. I'm going to put this down in D tier with a few of our other Seraph weapons here. It's not great. Speaking of let-off barrels, we have the Shredder Fire. This gun is really a great weapon. Unfortunately, it is only a world drop or a drop from Hyperiously Invincible, so it's very difficult to acquire. However, if you do acquire this weapon, it's really solid. It's a fun weapon to use, crazy high fire rate. Let-off assault rifles are just good. It's going to B tier. Next up, we have the Skull Masher. This is definitely a fan favorite. A Jacob sniper that fires shotgun-like projectiles. This gun's great. It's really fun to use. It works well with the V-Shield. It's a fantastic sniper. Definitely one of the best. It's going in the top of B tier. Yeah. Next up, we have Shotgun 1340 or something. I can't remember what it's called. Let's have a look. Oh, wow. It actually is called 1340. I'm such a nerd. Shotgun 1340. This is just a Hyperion shotgun that talks to you. It's kind of annoying like the Bane, but doesn't slow you down like the Bane. So, it's very bare bones. It's going to the bottom of D tier. Nothing special about it at all. Next up, the Slagger. The Slagger is probably one of the best bandit SMGs in the game. Probably one of the best slagging weapons in the game. And for that reason alone, this gun's going up in B tier. It's very much a utility weapon like the Logan's gun. I'd pair it with the Logan's gun. You're never really using it for damage, but it's got so much utility, it's worthwhile keeping around. Solid gun. Oh wow, this is such a long list. We're getting there, boys. We're getting there. I'm going to zoom out a bit further. Not that far. Next, Sledge's Shotgun. This in Borderlands 1 was an absolute fan favourite, but in Borderlands 2... I don't know, it's not really that good. The burst fire on Borderlands 2, the 2-shot burst, just feels so kind of difficult to use. See, I would put it, the rock salt's much better. I'd probably put this at the bottom of C tier. Yeah, I'm sticking with that. Next up we have the Sloth is a Dahl sniper. You know my feelings on Dahl snipers. There's not really much point in burst firing sniper rifles. They're made for accuracy. Why are we burst firing them? It doesn't deal good damage. This gun's not great. It's going in D tier. Next we have the Slow Hand. Unfortunately for this weapon, you have to farm one of the most annoying bosses in the game, Badasaurus Rex. However, this gun can be very good, especially if you do get this vertical grip, allowing us to get more projectiles. This weapon can be really good, and specifically for some like Maya backdraft builds, this gun is definitely a standout there. But it's so annoying to get. It is a Moxie weapon, so it is healing you as well. I think it's pretty good. I'm putting it middle of B tier. Next up we have this Storm. Another very underwhelming pearlescent weapons. For a rarity that's so hard to get, these really aren't that very good all in all. The Storm is a Maliwan shock-only sniper damage that has an interesting gimmick. When you hit the enemy, it spreads out like a shock cloud around them, which is pretty cool, but it just doesn't deal nearly enough damage to be useful. It's a pearlescent, you can only get it later on in the game, and the only time you'd want to use this weapon is in normal mode. I don't know, guys. It's in D tier, next to the Godfinger. Next up, the Stomper. This is a bare bones Jacob assault rifle. It's definitely better than the Cowboy. It's definitely not much good. I'd put it right next to the Hammerbuster. Yeah, kind of fine. Yep, we got the Stinger, which is a Vladov Seraph pistol. Vladov pistols, like we talked about with the Infinity, are pretty good. However, this gun just can't really shine that well. I don't know. It's not worth an awful lot. If the Infinity's in C tier, this is going just below it because it does basically the same thing, but doesn't have infinite ammo. Next up, the Stink Pot. This is acquired from the start of the Pirates Booty DLC and is another elemental Jacob's weapon in the form of a corrosive assault rifle. However, like I talked about with our Torg barrels, if you have a Torg barrel on a Jacob's weapon, it does become pretty good. And if you pair this with Krieg, for example, the Stink Pot can really be a great early to mid game weapon. I'm going to stick it top of C tier. It's pretty good. Unfortunately, if you don't get it to drop from No Beard, he is only a one-time spawn per playthrough. So unless you read-only farm with a 1 in 3, you're unlikely some people to ever see this weapon. Next up, we have the Stalker, another pearlescent weapon. The gimmick with this one is the bullets bounce around the place, but this is not a good weapon. It's another Vladov pistol, and I think it's in a very similar place to the Infinity. C tier. Next, we have the Striker. This is a pretty good Jacob shotgun, acquired from Old Slappy, which is a mission you get from Sir Hammerlock. It's a really good Jacob shotgun, but the best thing about the shotgun is its incredibly quick reload speed, making it one of the best weapons to stack up Anarchy on Gauge with. So for that added bit of utility, with just being a good shotgun in general, this is going straight up to near the top of B tier. The Teeth of Terror. The Teeth of Terror, in my opinion, is kind of like a bad blockhead. The blockhead is great. The Teeth of Terror is fine, but I really would never find myself using it over the blockhead. So it's going to go in C tier. Next up, we have the Teapot. This is a kind of basically the same weapon as the Hornet, but a slightly worse version of it. So for that reason, it's going to go... I'll put it near Hector's Paradise in C tier. Next, we have the Tattler. The Tattler is a Seraph drop and is actually a really good bandit SMG. It drops from Hyperius and can drop in any element and is basically a Bone Shredder on steroids. If I put the Bone Shredder in C tier, there's no way this is going anywhere lower than B tier. I'd put it similar to the last go. It's a really decent SMG. Next up, the Tidal Wave. This is acquired from a side mission in the arid Badlands. However, the problem with the Tidal Wave is it competes with another weapon for its reward, the Lady Fist. And if there has been anyone that has ever picked up the Tidal Wave instead of the Lady Fist after knowing what each weapon does, I don't know, there wouldn't be many people. The Tidal Wave is not a bad shotgun in itself, but it's kind of awkward to use due to its weird Tidal Wave shotgun pattern. And yeah, in Borderlands 1 it was cool to see, and it's nice to see it come back, but it's not really worth using. It's going in E tier. Flint's Tinderbox is one of the earliest unique weapons you can get. Drops from Captain Flint. It is a guaranteed drop, and it is just a bandit pistol. In the fire element, nothing special. It's going in E tier. Next up, the Toothpick. The Toothpick combined with the Retainer allows you to move really fast and jump really high in that specific map in the Fight for Sanctuary DLC. By itself, it is a burst fire only assault rifle, which is not bad. It's alright. I'll probably put it similar to the Infection Cleaner. It's got a bit more utility, so perhaps I'll bump it up to sort of nearer the top of B tier. It's a pretty good weapon. All of the effervescent weapons they are pretty much all reskins of other weapons, just beefed up and better. So there we go. Next we have the Trespasser, like I was talking about, the Amigo Sincero. Trespasser does exactly the same thing, allows you to shoot through shields, but just has less damage, less crit modifier, and so it is a less good weapon. Still a good weapon, and definitely has its uses, but with the Amigo Sincero being in the game, it doesn't really have its uses anymore. I'll put it in B tier for back in a day when it was good. Next up, Thunderbolt Fist. This drops from Captain Flint in the base game and is a Maliwan pistol, only ever in the shock element. And it fires its initial projectile, which then shoots up into like a storm in the sky and blows up. It's pretty good. It's not bad. Nothing really too special about it. I'd kind of put it near the Teapot, C tier. Next up we have the Triqueta, which is again another Jacob's shotgun, and surprise surprise, Jacob's shotguns are great. Doesn't have as many projectiles as the Hydra, but has certainly got a lot of projectiles compared to our normal Jacob shotguns, so this is going near the top of B tier. Really good weapon. Next, the Tunguska, a pearlescent rocket launcher. It's hard to acquire and it's not very good at all. Yeah, just doesn't really do enough damage. You end up killing yourself more than you ever kill enemies. It's going into D tier. I think it might be E tier. This gun's a real stinker. The Tunguska sucks. Next we have the Twister, another one of the rarest weapons in the entire game. It drops from Triple O in the Hammerlock's Hunt DLC. Unfortunately, you'll have to play the Hammerlock's Hunt DLC if you want this weapon, but if you are able to get him, and you're able to get this weapon to drop, you are not going to regret it. The Twister is honestly an absolute monster. It's going straight to the top of A tier. Oh, next up, the Unkempt Harold. Who could have foreseen where this would go? I'm going to stick it up in S tier. If you guys have seen any Borderlands video ever, the Harold's in it. The Harold's great. It's easy to get. It's absolutely insane. Yeah, it's an S tier weapon all over. The Veritas is a Vladov pistol, which doesn't do anything special. It's going in D tier. Bare bones weapon. Nothing to write home about. The Volcano, a very iconic weapon, especially in Borderlands 1. Came back in Borderlands 2. And it ends up being a fire Maliwan sniper. Maliwan snipers are pretty good in this game. Fire is a pretty useful element in this game. It's going in C tier. Next up, the Unicorn Explosion. This is a copy-paste sword explosion, except it fires unicorns instead of swords. Both great, both in A tier. Next up, the Varuk. This is a Dahl assault rifle. You know how I feel about Dahl assault rifles in this game. They're generally not great, but the Varuk's definitely not a bad one. You can get, because the weapon splits into different projectiles, it can benefit quite a lot of the B-Shield and stuff like that. I don't mind the Varuk, you know. I think it's alright. I'm going to stick it in C tier. Next up, the Unforgiven. More like unforgivable. This weapon stinks, man. It's another pearlescent, but just like our greed, it is capped out on fire rate. This weapon is so difficult to obtain, being a world drop pearlescent weapon, and it's so bad. Why did they make the pearlescent so bad in Borderlands 2? Ah, man. I don't know if to put this in F tier or E tier. I think I'm going to stick it in F tier. It's like the greed. It totally sucks, but it's harder to get. This is an F tier weapon. Speaking of F tier weapons, the Wanderlust. The only reason this is not going in F tier for me is because you can pair it with Gauge that you don't need the accuracy for on Anarchy, and the weapon can actually perform relatively well, but another pearlescent pistol that sucks. It's going in E tier. Next up, the Mongol. The Mongol is a Vladov launcher, and Vladov launchers are very good in Borderlands 2, and this weapon is no exception. I think this weapon is kind of slept on. As you fire the rocket, it fires additional projectiles around it, and it can deal some really good damage. This is going straight into C tier. Next up, the Nukem. The Nukem is kind of does less damage than the Ahab, so it's not as useful. It's fine. It's not great. It's just kind of fine. I certainly wouldn't prioritize using it. It's probably going to go in D tier for me. Next up, we have the Octo, a TDO shotgun. The gimmick with this one is it fires in a cool pattern. I don't know. It's not very good. It's a TDO shotgun, but not even a good one. This is going in D tier. Now, for another rare weapon. The Ogre. This weapon you can only get from the badass round of the Slaughter Dome in the Tiny Tina's DLC, which is a hell of a lot of work to get it. But when you do get it, you will not be disappointed. The Ogre is an absolute fantastic weapon. Torg spinny guns are some of my favourite weapons to use in Borderlands, and this one is certainly no exception. I'm going to put this one up in A tier, guys. This is a really great weapon. Next up, the Patriot. This weapon is a Seraph weapon with slow projectiles, so it kind of sucks. D tier. Okay, now we're on to some OP weapons. You know, I talked about the Cub Blaster having a bigger brother that was just better. Well, that's the Peak Opener. The Peak Opener is probably, nowadays, one of the best weapons in the entire game. Came with the Fight for Sanctuary DLC, and this weapon is a monster, and you can pair it with other shields and such to make it even stronger, specifically for the Peak. The Peak Opener is a weapon designed to make the Peak easy, and it really does along with the rest of the game. This is an S tier weapon. Next up, the Rapier. The Rapier is the single best melee damage weapon in the game, giving you 200% increased damage, and so for any melee build, this weapon is an absolute staple, and for that reason alone, it's going up in A tier. Next, we have the Nirvana. This is just a copy-pasted Hellfire. Basically exactly the same, but slightly higher base damage. I mean, it's going to go right next to the Hellfire, but slightly above it. Nothing really more to say. Ah, the Norfleet. Another one of Borderlands 2's best weapons. The Norfleet truly is a monster. It is so rare to get from Hyperius. But when you do finally acquire this weapon, you are not going to regret it. The Norfleet is going up into S tier. Next up, we have the Omen. The Omen is another Tedious Shotguns. You know my feelings by now on Tedious Shotguns. However, the Omen actually does have some relative use. It can roll in any different element. And as far as Tedious Shotguns go, it's not bad. It's going to be grouped up with my other good Tedious Shotguns up in B tier. Next, the Overcompensator. We talked about this before when talking about the Butcher. It's a solid gun, a very solid gun. Hyperion shotguns are generally good in this game, and allowing your Hyperion shotgun to shoot nearly forever is definitely not a bad thing. So this is going to go right next to the Butcher in B tier. Next up, the Pimpernel, another one of the Pirates Booty DLC weapons. The Pirates Booty DLC probably has some of the best weapons in the entire game. That is without a doubt true. God, the Pimpernel, what is there not to say? This weapon can be used offhand with Salvador to one-shot raid bosses at OP 10, which is just absolutely insane. It can roll in any element, so you can use it for a multitude of different things. It does high base damage, it's got a good reload speed, it's a melee one sniper. Melee one snipers are great. Do you want me to continue? This is an S tier weapon. The Pitchfork is a world drop. The Pitchfork is a burst fire sniper rifle, and I don't like that, but the Pitchfork does fire like 5 projectiles in a horizontal line. Kind of gives me Sandhawk vibes, so when paired with the B-Shot, it can actually be quite strong, but such a rare weapon and not the best weapon. Unlike the Sandhawk, the Pitchfork just doesn't have the ammo to accommodate the sort of playstyle you'd use this weapon for, so I'll stick it down in C tier. We're getting close now, boys. Orphan Maker, the Orphan Maker, a Jacob shotgun. Jacob shotguns are fantastic in this game, and the Orphan Maker is no exception. Probably our best Jacob shotgun in the game. By an absolute mile, the highest base damage on a Jacob shotgun. Its only downside is that it deals a small amount of self-damage to you, but in OP10 that doesn't matter because of all the healing you're going to get. Specifically this weapon on Salvador, when it's in your offhand, you don't even lose that health when shooting it. You gain so many benefits from money shot with this weapon. It's super accurate. This weapon's the best weapon for a Deputy Salvador build, hands down, S tier. Another Pirates Booty DLC weapon in the S tier. Next up, we have another Fight for Sanctuary DLC weapon, the World Burn. This is a Nukem, but only in the fire element, except let's just make the Nukem do more damage. It's an upgraded version. It's going near the top of B tier. It's a really good torque launcher in the fire element. It's just great. The Pocket Rocket. Now, it would not surprise me if some of you have never seen this weapon. It is a vending machine exclusive in the Torg DLC, and it's just a Torg pistol. Doesn't really do anything special. Yeah, bottom of D tier. Nothing to say. The Yellow Jacket. This is at the end of the Hammerlock DLC, and this weapon is an E-Tech Assault Rifle, an E-Tech SMG. And it is not a good SMG. It fires these projectiles that sort of speed up towards their target afterwards, but by the time they're near the target's already moved, so you end up missing half your shots, and don't use this weapon. It's going E tier. This weapon sucks. The Morning Star is a Hyperion sniper. I'm not a big fan of Hyperion snipers in general, but the Morning Star can have almost an infinite amount of crit damage stacking that you can do. As you reload this weapon, each time you do it, it gains bonus crit damage, and that can be incredibly powerful. It is annoying to use because it talks to you, but with some of its like unique effects, I can't put it really any lower than C tier, so that's where it's going to go. Next up, the Orc. The Orc is again, from the Tiny Tina's Slaughter round, you have to complete. It's a mission reward for completing it. And this weapon's unique ability, when you swap to it, you can gain, like, your projectiles have a chance to have, like, massively increased fire rate or increased damage and ricochet bullets and stuff like that. Now, this works when you swap off it to other weapons. It's like the Grog Nozzle effect. It carries over to other weapons. So, this can make other weapons absolutely insane. You can have, for example, the World Burn have this effect, and the projectiles get multiplied by like 12, and the fire rate gets increased massively. And yeah, this gun's utility is through the roof. For that reason alone, it's going over an A tier. The Pyrophobia is a Maliwan rocket launcher. Maliwan rockets aren't great in Borderlands 2, but they're not terrible. It's very middle of the road. If I got this in normal mode, I'd probably use it for a bit. If I got it in UVHM, I'd probably throw it into the grinder. It's kind of going to go in D tier. The Chopper. The Chopper is obtained from Deciduous the Invincible, a Hammerlock Hunt DLC weapon, and it is not good. The gimmick with the Chopper is it fires its whole magazine in a single button press, has an absolutely insane fire rate, costs an insane amount of ammo to use. It actually does a really good amount of damage because it's firing so much ammo, but if you're shooting this gun for any more than 10 seconds, you're gonna be running out of ammo. And aside from a very few gimmicks, this gun is not really gonna be one to use. I'm gonna put it in D tier. And our final weapon out of 139 weapons is the Lady Fist, and by far one of the strongest weapons in the game. This was the other weapon I was telling you competes with the Tidal Wave, and that is why you never really see the Tidal Wave picked up, because this is the other option, and the other option is amazing. The Lady Fist provides 800% crit damage. This is transferable to other weapons when you're playing characters such as Salvador, or just as itself paired with like the V-Shield. When you're talking these 800% values, damage multiplication is so insane that this weapon could just trivialize some of the bosses. I've got to put this one up in S tier with the all-time greats. This weapon is amazing. And I think that's about it. 139 of Borderlands' weapons, all ranked in one great big tier list for you to enjoy. I'm going to scroll out there just so you can I see it all on one screen? Like, just. There it is. My absolutely 100% correct Borderlands opinion, as it always is. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this monumental tier list of every Borderlands weapon in the game. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Drop us a sub. Let's go to 1,000. And if you agree or disagree with any of these suggestions that I've made here, drop us a comment down below. I read all your comments, guys. I love reading your comments. They're all great. And let me know what you guys think about this tier list, whether you think I've placed anything in the wrong area or whether you think I've got the majority of them right. But I'm just a Borderlands nerd talking about Borderlands weapons. So that's about it. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.